Good morning, everyone. And as the PowerPoint cord disengages, we'll just sort of like my life being disengaged. And of course, it probably won't work. Well, there it does. Okay, great. Good morning, and it's great to be here. And hopefully this will work. And it does. So I've been asked to speak for 20 minutes. And for me, that is a little bit of a difficulty because usually I've just told all my jokes by the first 20 minutes. But anyway, I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible and to talk a little bit about what it means to teach fairly in an unfair world. And I'm beginning to shift my thinking about it a little bit. You know, I've been involved in equity education for about 25 years and was very privileged to teach a course at the University of Toronto called Teaching Drama in an Inclusive Classroom. And my students were equity educators from across the Toronto Board of Education, and I was the drama educator. And I have to tell you that these equity educators helped me understand what it is I needed to know and to understand that the journey of learning how to teach fairly is a long one and one that probably never ends. So, you know, I think about all that teachers are asked to do, and I think about November, and I think about how you might be feeling. And you might actually be thinking this way a little bit. And so when I was in school in Montreal as a child, I had an amazing grade 4 teacher. And this was just after the quill pen had been put away, but not before the ballpoint, really, because I did actually learn to write using a fountain pen, and I continue to do so. And she had this way of teaching that was probably pretty 21st century, even though it was in the 50s. And she said, all I want you to do as one of the projects is to look at poems. Pick up poetry anthologies in libraries, in bookstores, in the school library. And when you find a poem, I want you to write it down. And I want you to write it out. Well, at this time in our lives, we would be downloading them. But it was the craft of writing out the words with a fountain pen to create my own anthology of poetry that made me a lover of language and a lover of poetry. And I get a poem of the day in my inbox every day. And for me, it's a way to center myself on thinking about the world, who I am in it, where I exist in it, what is my location in it, how do words help me understand it, how do I begin to see myself differently because of the language that surrounds me, that embeds itself in my heart and in my mind and in my spirit. So I want to say that equity is connected in so many ways to language, to the way in which one uses language, the way in which one talks oneself into understanding, the way in which one shapes one's thoughts at the point of utterance, and the way in which one understands the beauty and artistry of language. And I want to say that one of the ways to teach fairly in an unfair world, I think, is to do 3 things. To teach with artistry, and to find a way to make your work interesting, yes, complex, yes, but also artistic. And the way in which I do that is by allowing myself to be bathed in language, in poetry. And so I'm going to begin my session with a poem. And it's sort of connected to this image. It's called Table by Edip Cansever, translated from the Turkish by Richard Tillinghurst. And every time I read this poem, I think of teachers. A man filled with the gladness of living put his keys on the table. He put his flowers in a copper bowl there. He put his eggs and milk on the table. He put there the light that came in through the window, sound of a bicycle, sound of a spinning wheel, The softness of bread and weather he put there. On the table, the man put things that happened in his mind, what he wanted to do in life. He put that there. Those he loved, those he didn't love. The man put them on the table too. 3 times 3 makes 9. The man put 9 on the table. He was next to the window, next to a spinning wheel. He reached out and placed on the table endlessness. So many days he had wanted to drink a beer. He put on the table the pouring of that beer. He placed there his sleep and his wakefulness. Now that's what I call a table. It didn't complain at all about the load. It wobbled once or twice and then stood firm. The man kept piling things on. So when I think of teachers, myself included in November, I think about endlessness and how difficult it is to do our job with the kind of authenticity, complexity, and artistry that we know we want to do. I love this cartoon. Very adorable. I also love this picture of these students or these children at a cinema in 1958. I'm a Twitter person, and I'm always getting these amazing photographs that in the Twitterverse. And there's something about this picture that for me speaks to me as teacher, because here we have these kids. Yes, they're at a cinema. They're watching a film. But there's something about their engagement. There's something about their joy. There's something about their collectivity. There's something about the fact that there's no adult there. There's something about this picture that inspires me to do the kind of work that I want to do in a very, very multicultural world. My classrooms are that way. Your classrooms are that way. Those students that we saw in that picture were very kind of one-dimensional in terms of race, perhaps, and in terms of class, perhaps. We don't know. But we know that we teach in a classroom that is filled with kids from all over the world. But we still want to do that work where every voice matters, where kids come in and feel a gentle hum of excitement and wonder because of the ways we've set up our classroom. I taught an amazing student who is now teaching in Northern Ontario in a First Nations Métis Inuit community. And he sent me a picture of his classroom on the first day. He taught a grade 3 last year, and he brought those kids into a grade 4 situation. And this is what the students came in to see on the very first day of school. And he said, Kathy, it was amazing. They came in and went, there I am. And they remembered what they looked like last year and how they had been the year before and how honored they were to be sitting there represented by their own hands, being a collective group of people. And this is the kind of thing that I think is so exciting for us. To think about ways that we encourage kids to come into classrooms and see themselves as agents in their own learning, as co-creators of artistry, of complex understandings, of authentic ways of knowing. And for me, this picture says all sorts of things. I'm beginning to think that the only way I'm going to do PowerPoints now is through image. Because I think image is so powerful, and this picture to me says so many things. So I think teaching is about bringing kids into the circle. And last year I had the opportunity of working with the Ontario Association of Deans of Education and the Ontario Teachers Federation, where we had Lee Maracle, a First Nations speaker, come and speak at the conference. And she said, at home I was valued. At school, it was different. And she challenged the participants at the conference to say, how do we give everyone value in the circle? Larry talks about circle. I've seen Larry with circles. If Larry had his way, this would be a circle. Unfortunately, we can't do that in this ballroom. But we all come together to learn. So how do we hold each other up? I've just been awarded a huge Ministry of Education grant to work with teachers from across 10 different school boards in Ontario when we met on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week to talk about how we can innovate, how we can integrate, and how we can imagine a different kind of way forward for students in Ontario. How can we imagine ourselves differently as teachers of language, of math, of science, of social studies, of geography, of physical and health education, of the arts? How can we imagine the ways in which we can embed culturally responsible and relevant and responsive pedagogy into our classrooms? And of course, this is the new buzzword, right? But it's actually extremely important. And many of us do this already. But I think it's great to remind ourselves about what culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy is. And it's this, that students learn what is most meaningful to them. But school is about introducing to students to things that they would never stumble over unless we taught them. So the point of education and the point of teaching is, yes, they learn what is most relevant to them, but we as teachers have to figure out how to lead them to that. What are we going to do, say, bring in? What are we going to read to them? What are we going to teach that is going to actually have them say, gee, I thought I understood that, but I see it totally differently now because of what you just said, what you just did, what you just taught. And I think that this is important, that teaching is actually hugely complicated. I had a student a couple of years ago, came in to see me, a teacher candidate. His name was Ryan. Comes in, he says, could I just see you for a few minutes? So he comes into my office. He says, Kathy, I'm getting married in June. Now, I'd been out to see him teach. He taught grade 8. It was a hard class, I have to say. And it was a struggle, really hard. But anyway, he said, I'm getting married in June, and I just don't think I can be married and teach. And I said, I don't think so. I think you should break up with her. But, I think that this, that's what, those of us who are in teacher education, have to help students understand it's complicated, right? That teaching is about thinking about teaching and figuring it out and wondering forward, if I did this, what will happen? If I didn't do this, what will happen? How am I going to change direction? I did that last year, it didn't work. What am I going to change about it? How am I going to bring everybody into the circle? Because you want to use students' cultures and identities and as vehicles for learning. We know that. We want to open up the window on the world and teach kids lots. We want to mirror back to them their identities, and the identities in plurals, their genders, their races, their socioeconomic status, their sexual orientations. They want to see themselves in the work that we do with them and in the source material we bring them. But we also, and this is the key piece, and this is the harder piece, we want students who are culturally responsive to relevant pedagogy to say, I don't actually think that is true. I've been thinking about it. I was talking to my dad. I was reading something the other day. Because what you really want to do is to critique it. Have kids critique what they're being taught. You know that you've got wise and educated students. Not sure about that. When they actually put up their hands and say, I don't know, I have a different take on this. Because that's culturally responsive, relevant pedagogy. That's equity education. That's saying your voice matters. What you say and how you think and how you're struggling to understand something that we're all engaged in learning. Your voice, your take is important to hear And we need to find out how we can all begin to understand each other differently. Ways of knowing. And in my work with teacher candidates, I say, good teachers sort of think about three things. They need to have a sense of student. They need to understand who's in the room. And, I think that this is important for us to figure out how to do that. Not invasively, but to find different ways through the differentiated ways in which we teach for kids to tell us who they are, what they care about, where they're from, in all sorts of ways. And in Teaching Fairly and in a lot of my other books, there are chapters devoted to this. How do you find out who's in the room? Location, location, location is not just a real estate term. It tells us a lot about what kind of choices we have to make as teachers. I was speaking to the inner city principals in the Toronto board, Toronto District School Board, the other week, and they know who's in their schools, who is in their school, who understands who their kids are. Key piece. Because if teachers understand kids, then students begin to have a sense of self. They begin to see that they have a capacity for success, that they have a sense of competency, and they begin to be more autonomous. They begin to think, I can do this. I don't need you right now. I can go away and think about this. I can go away and learn. I need you in a minute, but I don't need you right now. And what I'm interested in, and what I'm working with these teachers from the 10 different school boards on, is our own sense of self, our own self-actualization, our own ability to throw out what Andy Hargraves calls the Julie Andrews curriculum. These are a few of my favorite things. And actually take some risks and do something that is relevant, authentic, artistic, and pushes the boundaries. Because actually, the way in which we teach and what we teach and how we teach is key to the success of our students. It's not just being nice, Being nice is important. It's being really good at what you do. And when you take risks in teaching, you need to make mistakes. And so I think it's really important to forgive yourself when you do that. I'll tell you, in the last 2 days, it was the highest level of stress I've had in a long time, and I made about 3 errors, big ones. One I'm probably going to pay for in all sorts of ways, never mind. But you know what? I haven't forgiven myself yet, but it was a teaching error, But this is a big project, so I have to kind of forgive myself. I don't know how much more time I have, but anyway, I'm going to keep going just because I was really affected last year by the Deputy Minister of Education's line at a conference that I went to where Mary Jean Gallagher said this very clearly to 300 teachers from the OFIP schools. These are the schools, the lowest performing schools in the province. So the ministry brought 300 teachers, principals, leads, superintendents into a ballroom. And I and a math educator from Trent University worked with them for the day, talking about this kind of teaching. But it was really this line that affected me when Mary Jean Gallagher said, there are no disposable children in the world. And I thought to myself, well, how am I going to address these teachers who are in schools where the scores either stay where they are or go down? And I said to them, you're the superstars. You're the superstars of education because you're the ones that don't give up. You're the ones that keep going. You're the ones when it's not easy, you keep trying to figure out what can I do differently, better, in more relevant ways to move my students on. Because language matters in so many ways, as I've just said, but circumstances matter. We know that. And I'm interested in how do we bring students from the margins into the mainstream. And I like to ask ourselves, what are the consequences of leaving students out? I'll tell you something. This is a picture that is on the front of the magazine of the school I went to in Montreal. The school is called. And my mother went to the city, and I went to the city, as did my sister. Private girls' school. I grew up, and I had a very good education. My father, however, had a public education. He went to, and I can tell you, my father was better educated than my mother. He was taught by World War I veterans, men who probably could have gone on to do other things, but because of what happened to them in the war, they ended up being high school teachers. He was a far better educated, far more intensely interesting person. He was more interested in learning because of the way he had been taught. So when people say to me, you know, public education, you know, they're all, you know, it's so complicated, it's so varied, it's so diverse. Yes, it is. But we used to have on the front of every Toronto Board of Education truck when the Toronto Board of Education teachers make a difference. And actually we know that teaching makes the difference. Not only being nice, and not only being aware, and not only being able to think about how to set up one's classroom, but how do we teach? How do we teach in ways that rivet kids, arrest their attention, make them think in new ways? How do we leave room for them to put up their hands and say, you know, I have another take on this. So I want to end with just talking about you. This is a picture of teachers that I worked with in the summer in a math symposium. Teaching matters. Stories matter. These are former Ugandan child indentured soldiers that I worked with last year in Kitchener-Waterloo. And I initially went in to think, well, I'll get them to tell me their stories. And then I thought that would be pretty crazy. But I ended up asking them to tell me stories of their name. And we spent a day and a half listening to the stories of the strengths of their name, the heritages associated with it, the family stories associated with it. And we began to work through drama and through storytelling to put together a very small presentation about their names. And in your handout, there is a handout about names. You don't have to look at it now, you can look at it later. But name storytelling, you know, Hannah Arendt says, storytelling is the way the imagination goes visiting. And for me, the way in which one begins to tell stories in the classroom, to begin to have kids tell their stories about who they are and where they're from, has to be carefully thought out, as it was this afternoon. When I was in Victoria this summer, I was teaching a grad course at the University of Victoria, and I began with asking these grad students to tell me their names. And a South Asian woman began to cry because we had insisted as we went around the circle that everybody say their name and say their name the way we need to say it and learn it. And she told a story about all her life, even as a Canadian-born South Asian woman. Her name was always mispronounced. It's still mispronounced. It's always mispronounced. And one of the things that I'm interested in is how do you take learning in the classroom and artistically represent it? So one of the things that these students had to do was to respond to what they had learned through an artistic frame. So the last day of the course was a multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary presentation of their learning. So I started with a poem, and I'm going to end with a song that Taylor Caldwell, in the class, he was so moved by this woman's story. He said, I'm going to write her a song. And so he did. And in the presentation, this was the beginning of our performance. And it's the end of mine. It's called Learn My Name. This is from Taylor Caldwell to the student who wept. My name has meaning, and the word you use instead has meaning too, because every time that you don't see that the I in my name isn't silent like me, you take my identity and run it over. You run me over. How can you help me if you don't know me? And you don't know me. So let me ask, is who I am worth your time? Is who I am worth your time? Then learn my name. Learn my name. Learn my name. We can start with my name. Thank you very much.